maybe if we flip it on the other on its head, like in fact, humans are the only species that's confused about what to eat. Humans are the only ones that are like, well, we don't recognize our own food and our own medicine, where every single other species, they know what to eat. They know how to take care of themselves. Like a deer doesn't need an instruction manual or a lesson, right? It's kind of instinctual within all species. And I believe we still have that potential within us. It's just been so long since we've A, acknowledged it, B, cultivated it kind of on a large group scale as well as individually.
Welcome to the Light Cellar podcast, brought to you by Light Cellar, a place where you can learn to find and craft your own food and medicine. In this interview series, you will meet a range of characters in the health and wellness space that are bringing light to your everyday. You'll hear from a number of different experts on a wide variety of topics. We have several different series within the podcast, including our Wild Wisdom and Storytelling with Blaine and Andrusek, the Rays of Light, inspiring wellness in the community, plus solo casts, Q&As, and other topics for you to enjoy. You can find this as a video version as well as the audio on any of your favorite platforms. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this with somebody you know who will benefit. You can also shop online at lightcellar.ca.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome back. Another episode of Wild Wisdom and Herbal Storytelling with Herbal Elder, Blaine and Andrusek. It's been a couple weeks since we did an episode. In the meantime, you had delivered your alternative first aid. Yeah, it was a great afternoon.
I think that went really well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we had a nice little group and 5.5 hours of, covering the whole gamut. Lots of stories were shared, anecdotes about, the practical experience that you've had over the years that's led to all this wisdom of what to do.
How many times I almost coulda, shoulda, woulda died.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It was interesting that I've had some pretty scary things. And when I was in for, at a certain age, I think it's 50, they want you to have a biopsy of your colon, right?
Right.
And when you have a choice of, and most people go, it's annoying, especially for men. Mm-hmm. I've had a lot of nurses tell me that men are mostly wusses, even just getting needles and things.
Right.
So that most people would get drugged for it.
Oh, really?
But I chose not to, so that you can watch the monitors and see the whole thing. And I said, I can watch the movie. And
right.
And she said, well, yes, most of our doctors, for example, have to go straight back to work. So they don't, they're not going to get sedated.
Yeah.
So anyway, when it was all over, I just said, some of the staff was there cleaning up the room for the next patient. And I said, they're not there. And they all looked at me and said, wait, what's not there? And I, well, they're not there. What? I said, well, I've had so many close calls in my life that a lot of friends and family have said things like, you must have golden horseshoes up your butt or something. and we now know certainly they aren't there.
They're not there.
And that got a good laugh out of the whole staff. They thought I was a lunatic, but anyway.
Cool. Well, on today's episode, we got a few different topics we're going to delve into. If you've been tuning into the news, I've had it forwarded to me at least twice, and I think you had it shared, or you came across the news, this idea of an orangutan that had self-medicated.
Yeah, a friend just thought it was cute and I might be interested, forwarded, and she used the word cute. It was a CBC blurb.
Yeah.
That an orangutan in, I don't know, Indonesia or some such place, had self-medicated a wound. They had footage of it doing this particular hoot that was like a battle cry that brought other males in, probably over territory or something. Yeah. And it was probably like a fist fight or whatever, but he had a really deep gouge.
Yeah, pretty big.
To one side of his, doesn't matter which side, eye. And he started immediately self-medicating. It's a vine. I had to go through a lot of sites to actually get find out what plant it was. It's a tropical vine. I'm just going to set this down for a minute. And finally got a Latin name. Where did I put that down? The common name is Liana. Latin name Fibroria tinctoria. And interesting, it's analgesic. Oh, so as soon as he put it on, it felt good, took the pain away.
Yeah.
Antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, antifungal, antioxidant, and it's used by humans for malaria even.
Right, okay.
And the whole thing started to make sense, where they wondered why at times some of these orangutans were like even crushing the leaves up and rolling in them for general pain.
Okay.
Like, do they get arthritis or what's the deal? And
Right.
it had never quite made sense. But anyway, it was a natural park situation with a group of biologists. So they have been tracking. It's kind of like a family that's there as part of in the park, and they keep track of them. So the critter even had a name. Like, his name was Rackus, and so they found it amazing that Rackus was chewing up these leaves till it got to a nice paste,
Yeah.
and then patting it into his wound, and repeating that several times a day.
Right.
And over the course of a month, it had completely 100% healed.
Right.
There was no scar-looking tissue or anything like that.
Yeah.
So they found this quite fascinating, and I just thought, kind of like, why not?
Yeah, totally. That was my perspective. It's just like, in fact, it was so patronizing of us, like, oh, look at this. They seem to present this as if there's some kind of rare freak, sign of intelligence, beyond humans, that that other animals could make such a great leap about self-medicating using plants. And I've got a few stories, a few examples. I'm sure you've got a number. You were mentioning about your dog. We'll reference this book here later on as well. But maybe if we flip it on on its head, like, in fact, humans are the only species that's confused about what to eat. Humans are the only ones that are like, well, we don't recognize our own food and our own medicine, where every single other species, they know what to eat. They know how to take care of themselves. Like a deer doesn't need an instruction manual or a lesson, right? It's kind of instinctual within all species. And I believe we still have that potential within us. It's just been so long since we've A, acknowledged it, B, cultivated it kind of on a large group scale as well as individually. So I think we're a long ways back to it, but I think it's within us too.
Like, you're the mushroom guy, and how often do we see in the forest where a mouse has come up and just taken one bite out of a mushroom, and then decided, oh no, this is too bitter or something, I guess.
Yeah.
And they leave it alone.
Yeah. I don't know. What's your thought on that too? Like, kind of that natural intelligence within species. Like, let's pick different animals, that kind of thing, and. Julie Walker, who I don't think you've met, I'll have to connect you guys. Full Circle Adventures. She's been naturalist, leading plant walks for quite a number of years. She always tells the story about in Banff National Park, there was a grizzly, I think like 30 years old, like quite an elderly grizzly, 30, 35, had died of natural causes. And they ended up doing kind of like examining it. I don't know if it was like a full-on autopsy, but just upon their examination, they noticed that it had willow packed in its mouth. And it was self-medicating because it had, like abscess. It was like, its age, its teeth were deteriorating, and it had been like chewing and packing in willow to deal with the pain and the infection.
Much as I would use essential oils.
Yeah, totally.
So, and are they taught this from their mother? We don't know, right?
Yeah.
There was the thing I brought up in the car on the way over, and like, me today wouldn't have missed this, but at the age I was when this happened, it just didn't make any sense to me that one of my former dogs was a borzoi, or often called a Russian wolfhound, and they did use them to hunt wolves. I met one fellow who, the people I got my puppy from, they could kind of tell instinctively just from watching the pups where there was one that was going to be kind of have an attitude or would be more aggressive than others.
Right.
And they had a fellow, they knew, a client, I guess, that wanted the rangy ones because he had a pack of hounds, and he would go out on horseback hunting wolves.
Right.
And the dogs would bring the wolf down, and then if needed to, he had a handgun and he'd come up on the horse
Right.
and finish it if necessary. But he literally used it, for hunting.
Wow.
Or like elk hounds, where the animals would literally bring the elk down.
Right.
And then he'd come up and shoot it to finish the job if required, and quarter the thing. And in some cases, the dogs would even drag the sled out with the meat on it.
Right.
But anyway, so I had a borzoi, which is known as a Russian wolfhound. And something it had never done before, when I let it out in the morning for its pee, and the dog went straight down the steps out of the kitchen door and around the corner to where the comfrey was growing and start chewing on comfrey leaves.
Right.
And I just thought, let's just guess, maybe the dog's 5 years old at this point, whatever, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it had never done this before, and I thought it was particularly odd. And after a few weeks of that, I had friends over. I think it was a stampede party, and one of my friends was sort of giving the dog some attention, and somehow noticed that it had a severely swollen gum on one side, and that I should get the dog to the vet or whatever. And I felt like a bad dad kind of thing. But I got to this vet, and he said, "Don't beat yourself up. This is really common." The dog got a cracked tooth, probably chewing on a bone or even a rock. Some dogs chewing. I don't know why they chew on a rock, but chewing on a bone, get a cracked tooth that got infected, which led to the whole gum getting infected.
Right.
Very common. We'll just pull the tooth and give it some antibiotics and quit being. But comfrey's a Russian plant, and this was a Russian dog. And I said, is that possible, that it's just intuitive?
Right.
That, and then a later dog was my first Akita. That's a Japanese dog that was bred to be, there was some royalty, I don't know what he was, let's just say a duke or something, someone of title, that was ostracized and got into breeding what he thought was the perfect dog to be a guard and good for hunting big game, because they'd go after bear and other things with it. And so he invented the Akita, and offered not leftovers, but just table scraps. The dog would never, ever touch anything that remotely didn't look Japanese. Like if we'd had a stir fry with lots of ginger and garlic and everything, and a bit of real food left there, it'd lick the plate.
Right.
But it didn't touch anything that didn't look Japanese.
Right.
And I was kind of like, come on, like. But there's some connection there, right? So I was, and just going to this book, when I was flipping through websites trying to learn more about this recent experience, it came up in one of the articles that chimpanzees, they noticed, had for years been eating a particular plant that's very coarse, and the chimps were using it to get rid of stomach parasites,
right,
and even intestinal parasites. And they've known that for years. And this is one of the things that she's quoting on the back cover of this book. And I had no idea. We've got Dr. Goodall. She's the giraffe lady, right?
No, the...
Jane, I mean?
Yeah, Jane Goodall. She's famous for working with, what's the type of... it's not orangutans, chimpanzees.
Oh, she's
the gorillas.
She's the gorilla lady.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Who's the who am I confusing her with? The giraffe person.
Giraffe. I don't know who's the giraffe person.
Like her whole life, she's dedicated her whole life to giraffes.
Cool.
Anyway, she's cited there on the back cover.
Yeah.
And even emotional things, it's mentioning, it's not just, there's something there about elephants crying. And I know from my former sister-in-law, who had become a zookeeper, there was one of the elephants here at the Calgary Zoo they had to be very careful with, because elephants really bond with some of the keepers, and they have to be very careful if they get a new zookeeper, because they'd had an incident where I'm quite sure one of the elephants, there was a new zookeeper, and she just didn't like the new lady.
Right.
And from memory, she actually killed a woman.
Right.
She just
kind of leaned.
Leaned in and crushed her against the wall.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, so once after that, they would never allow one person to be in the cage, the indoor pen,
right,
with the elephants. So, wow.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's cool. So this book, it's called Wild Health, Cindy Engel, Lessons in Natural Wellness from the Animal Kingdom. Yeah, you're right. There's a reference to author of When Elephants Weep, The Emotional Lives of Animals. This one's talking about how animals prevent and cure sickness and poisonings, help heal open wounds, balance their diets, regulate fertility. So as you mentioned, chimpanzees eating bitter-tasting plants that combat intestinal parasites, elephants roaming miles to find clay they ingest to counter dietary toxins. Broken-legged chicks have been known to eat foods that lessen pain. Like, it's just kind of like example after example of, yeah, this kind of innate intelligence. Or is it learned? I would lean more towards it's innate, it's like instinctual versus a taught. Not to say that they obviously couldn't be taught.
Yeah.
Like if we take pets, a lot of pets, you know, that have that, they're taken away from their mothers, right? If you get a puppy, if you get a kitten, right? Like they haven't had that time and that kind of, in some animals, that's just how it is in nature. It's like, okay, you're on your own, you know, like human species take this very, very, very long time of like kind of the sheltering and the nurturing, right, standard, like 18 years. Yep. And, you know, in the past, maybe that's been a little bit shorter. Actually, I've heard that the general rule is it's about 1/10 to life expectancy of that maturing. So an animal, like, so if it lives 50 years, it'll be 5 years with its mother or with its parental kind of social unit. So on the basis of that, for humans, then we should be living to 180, or we've just extended it, you know, farther past. Although I can't imagine a 9-year-old being, you know, out on their own based upon our life expectancy. So either we're not living as long as we should, or we're kind of, you know, nurturing and coddling our youth longer than we should. But I've never been a pet owner myself, apart from like short stints as a young child having hamsters and newts and this kind of thing. But, you know, is it cats or dogs, the ones that will like use grass to self-medicate? Is that cats that will eat grass? Or
well, I know dogs do.
Dogs do it as well.
If they eat something bad, yeah, like they'll chew it irritates the stomach lining and they'll puke. Yeah,
right.
All the grass comes right up.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to embarrass myself here. I'm trying to remember a herb that we were highly recommending other than ginkgo biloba. Right. What was another herb that we were recommending from memory? Oh. It's actually a vine. And anyway, the point of bringing it up was that what do we say about elephants? They never forget. Right. And somehow I stumbled across that where this plant grows is exactly the migratory path of the Indian elephant. Its migratory path is where that herb is abundant, right. And they eat it regularly. Yeah. And we know today, for people as well, except me, it's really good for memory. Yeah. Because I grew some, I had it as a houseplant, and it was a vine where ginkgo is like a tree, you know? Yeah. Gotu-kola, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Neat. Yeah, awesome. Well, intelligence of the plant kingdom, or the animal kingdom rather, right?
So recommend this book. There's so many examples. A friend of mine, because I do this foraging forecast, and just a few weeks ago we did a feature on rose hips, and it was one of the staff actually that was like, oh yeah, every time we go for a walk, the dogs, they'll just go crazy for the rose hips, you know, like they're just kind of jumping up, you know, biting them off the bush, like they just love the rose hips. So something there.
Yeah, mine did.
Yeah.
The Akitas loved rose hips, and I know my wolf hybrid went for the hawthorn.
Right.
He had a stretch where he was big enough, tall enough, he could stand up to look over a 9-foot fence.
Oh, wow.
So we had hawthorn, we've probably covered somewhere, is very calming. You know, it's a very nerve supportive plant.
Yeah.
And I was one of the dog owners in the park, because we had whole groups of us that would meet, see each other regularly. And this one couple from Texas had a hound that used its voice as a weapon. Like, it was just so loud. I mean,
Yeah.
I lived a block from the park, and I could hear that dog if it opened its mouth.
Yeah.
And if another dog went to steal its toy, for example, their dog would just open such a blast of sound that the other dog would just forcibly drop,
Yeah.
you know, and leave the situation. But I was there picking the berries one day, and he asked what I was doing, and I told him, and you know, that it was good for calming and stuff like that, and then I said, you should pick some of these too, kind of like for your dog, okay? To calm it down. But yeah, is it innate? Is it genetic or
Right. And then
whatever?
even, you know, like, I know you've often mentioned that idea that, you know, the bison here roaming on the plains would consume the wormwood, right? And therefore a very clean meat,
Oh, yeah.
anti-parasitic.
Yep.
But the cows haven't done that, you know, either they don't like it or, you know, maybe because of where they kind of originate from. But you think after being here for so many generations.
But it is very bitter.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, Tatanka
Right?
would eat it freely, but
Yeah.
cattle don't. So I consider that bison grazing over here must look at those stupid cows over there. They don't even know what's good for them.
Yeah. Cool. Well, fascinating. That's something for, you know, scientists to continue to ponder. But yeah, I was taken by that article and people's enthusiasm around it of like, I mean, it's remarkable, it's amazing, but I didn't necessarily personally see it as novel, you know, in that sense. It's like, oh, of course, you know, like animals do this all the time. And yeah. And I see my own journey as an animal to kind of reclaim that innate knowing as much as possible.
Well, with caution in the forests, I mean, we kind of recommend if you're going to try anything new,
Yeah.
do it very sparingly and wait at least 24 hours
Right.
to see what happens, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's not going to help you with an amanita mushroom if you get the wrong one, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it reminds me of another story actually where, you know, humans, part of how we've developed our knowledge, our wisdom around plants has become from observing animals in nature. I mean, that's kind of the premise of this book, right?
Yeah,
like lessons
I would
from
read
the
that.
animal kingdom. So the term epimedium, you know, as a herb in Chinese medicine, also known as horny goatweed, right? Like, well, how did we figure that out, right? It's in the name. It was observing the goats, right? The goat herders taking the goats up to this certain place where epimedium grows and getting a little frisky and then going, oh, I should try that, you know? And similar story I've heard about the yak herders that would, you know, go to the high elevations. The yak would eat the cordyceps and also experience, you know, positive benefits that the yak herder wanted. And I'm sure there's many stories like that, observing animals and their kind of response and reaction. I think the trick comes, you mentioned about mushrooms. Okay, if a squirrel can eat it, must be safe. Well, not necessarily,
Not
right?
necessarily. They have different digestive systems, right?
Yeah, for sure. So,
and for those of you who've never put these thoughts together, animals like squirrels that want to stash things and build up a cache, you can't put a bunch of fresh mushrooms in a hole in the tree. They'd go moldy.
right.
So you'll see spruce trees, for example, with a whole bunch of mushrooms, almost like Christmas decorations, where they've taken mushrooms
Yeah.
and put them on the branches of the tree
Yeah.
to air dry.
Yeah,
there.
totally. Yeah, upside down.
They don't have electric dehydrators.
Cool. All right, well, speaking of forests, something that should be news, I just want to make everybody aware that there's all kinds of proposed logging. They did an open house in Cochrane last night, May 8th. We're recording this on the morning of the 9th with West Fraser and their plans to do all kinds of logging, including Moose Mountain, West Bragg Creek, and there was many other sites listed. Kind of the one that's most notable, that's really getting people up in arms. Not only are these like watersheds, that basically provides water for Southern Alberta, and though we've had a good amount of moisture this spring, we're going into a summer where they're saying we're kind of behind in a deficit of water. We're looking at droughts and water rationing. That's all kind of yet to be determined in the coming weeks. But like West Bragg Creek, an area where literally hundreds, if not thousands of people a week. That place is just so popular as a place to go. It's been extensively, developed out with trail systems and all that, and they want to clear cut sections of that.
I've been doing herb walks there for years.
Yeah, it's totally insane.
And that's something that I know Terry's done this several times. I did it once for the government of Saskatchewan, where we were hired to prove that if you go into an area and clear cut it, you can come back and plant baby trees, and that's a standard that a lot of the companies put some pride in.
Right.
We're going to replant it, right?
Yeah.
But as you know better than I do, the mycelium
Right.
that's in that earth is going to bake in the sun and dry out.
Yeah.
And I always use the expression, the little people. And anyway, the point of bringing this up is that we have proven that the herbs that are growing there are actually worth more than the timber.
Right.
So why are you going to destroy this forest?
Yeah. No, it's so short-sighted.
If it's about money, or at the very least, if you have to clear cut something, if it's about killing pine beetles or something like that, make an announcement so that a group of herbalists would go in and wildcraft the area first.
Yeah.
To get, if it's about money, let's harvest the herbs first.
Yeah, totally.
Because once you clear cut it, they're done.
Yeah, for sure. You're not getting that diversity back, at least for a long time. I mean, and you can sense it. You go into these places that are replants, and they're typically monocultures, just one species of tree, and just like there's a different energy, there's a different feeling. Not to mention, just kind of visually, you look at it, and all the trees are the same size, and they're kind of spaced out, and there's just an unnatural like look and feel and everything about it. And then the lack of biodiversity. These forests don't thrive because they've lost all the little people that's in the soil, the bacteria, the fungi, which are the foundation of that ecosystem, providing health, and then the biodiversity of all the other herbs and plants in it. I agree. And of course, we're not anti-forestry. I have plenty of wood products that surround us that we utilize, and it's a beautiful material. But it's just this kind of wholesale, clear cutting that just will not stop. And the other thing is, like, we so clearly value these spaces. I mean, just go anywhere in Calgary, go down to Boness Park, go out to Nose Hill, go out, as the population increases, the density of people like showing up in these parks, because we all love those spaces, like go out to Banff National Park. Somebody who told me like the number of visitors they'll get in a day, like on an average Saturday, like tens of thousands.
Yep.
And we should be creating more of these spaces. What is left? I mean, the Alberta government decommissioned a whole bunch of parks. And we're losing a lot of these natural spaces when they're so clearly valuable, as you say, beyond just the timber, just as natural spaces. So West Pratt Creek is an example. Another one that you should be aware of, and I'd only heard about this in the last 2 weeks, is what they call the legacy parks. So they want to flood between Calgary and Cochrane, flood mitigation. I think it's the Ghost Dam that needs upgrading, but so they can upgrade that or they can flood this valley. So, excuse me, there's...
So there'd be a whole new dam somewhere?
I think is it the Bears Paw Dam? No, they built that. It's the one, along the Bow. Maybe they have to create a new dam. But there's 2 brand new parks, land that was donated. So there's the Glenbow Ranch, again, between Calgary and Cochrane, and then Haskayne Park, which really just opened last year. And then they were talking about connecting the river pathway, so you could cycle all the way from Calgary to Cochrane along that.
Yep.
All that would be gone because they want to flood that area. So, totally insane, these beautiful spots. We were also talking about natural prairie. It's easy to go to BC and just be wowed by the ecosystem, the big giant cedars and Doug firs and the lusciousness of it. But the Alberta prairie is a little bit more humble, right? It's beautiful and it's diverse and it's a rare, valuable ecosystem. It's just not as big and grand as dramatic, and there's actually very, very little of it left in Alberta. And I believe that's one of the features of Haskayne Park, that it has kind of native prairie still intact. So,
and the average person would just look at it and say, well, it's just grass.
Grass, yeah.
But talk to an Indigenous elder about how many herbs are growing out there.
Right, yeah.
How many roots were harvested and things like that as food or medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, what's the action, right? It's like, well, call your MLA and, it's kind of futile as that seems. It seems to be definitely one concrete action. They had the open house where the public could engage with West Fraser and their plans. I heard a few reviews about that, but it's I'm not sure where it'll all lead. But this is why one of the other reasons I'm really passionate about herbs and herbalism and people developing a connection to nature. It's conservation through engagement. As you say, like realizing the value. If you talk to an Indigenous elder, they'll tell you what plants are in the ecosystem and the value that they have, because it's incredibly important. And most people totally disconnected, well, my medicine comes from the pharmacy and my food comes from the grocery store. That's it.
Yeah.
So why would I care about that space other than, maybe being able to go and have a nice walk over there once in a while, kind of thing.
Well, and you'd think, well, I'm just going further to what you were saying a few moments ago, but some of the existing trails in K-Country, I'm thinking of the Lillian Lake Trail for one.
Right.
If you want to go there on a weekend, you better get there real early to get parking.
No, it's insane. Yeah.
So as the city has grown, it's obvious that we've got more and more people that want to get out there.
Yeah.
I used to, and people might, I've had people think, really? You were an off-roader kind of thing, because they've seen incredible damage
Right.
out in the woods by off-roading. And I said, well, yes. And part of my real truth is that I would waste my day off winching or towing people that didn't even have a four-wheel drive. They had a pickup truck or a Volkswagen or whatever.
Right.
There was an occasion where I definitely bloodied my knuckles. There was two girls in just a regular Volkswagen Beetle.
Right.
And they were halfway up a cut line on the backside of Moose Mountain, and it was muddy. It had been raining for a week. They're lucky they didn't roll it, because they'd spun out on the mud and were sitting completely sideways, halfway up this trail. And, and they're saying, well, what can we do? And I said, for starters, never come back. This car doesn't belong here. You don't even have grippy tires or anything.
Yeah.
And that's come up a few times. But, many times over the years, there'd be some place I had in mind. I'd been before for camping, but I'd come out. It had been raining for a week, and there's a big mountain meadow or foothills meadow, and I could just see what the conditions were and think, well, if I go out there today, I'm going to be stuck in the mud all day.
Right.
Waiting for somebody. There's nothing to winch to. So I'm just not going to go. But not everybody has that way of thinking.
No.
You get some of these big monster trucks, and they just go out and there was that Corblund song about the Dodge got stuck till the Ford showed up, or that whatever that hit song was.
Okay.
And you get places like that where I got to thinking that maybe we should actually have an off-road license.
Right.
Like
some basic, like,
and you have some level of training for what not to do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you have avalanche training, like for winter activities. If you're out in certain conditions, you gotta, be aware.
But although I was sad for personal, that a lot of my favorite old camping spots were closed. You can go in with a horse or on foot.
Right.
That's it. And I was sad, but I had my day. I know I was smart enough. I didn't do any damage.
Right. Yeah, no, it's one of those like kind of personal inner conflicts that I have. Like I'm generally, anti-government, anti-regulation, like individual. I lean more towards individual freedom. And yet, there are certain rules and restrictions because some people are just idiots, and other people are too exploitive, right? So how do you kind of, find that midline, that kind of the protection that's required, on that level?
I can't remember how and where this happened. It might have been when I was on foot doing one of the herb walks with one of our camp out weekends or something, but there was an area that, like I was saying, was just all ripped. It was just muddy and like, why would anybody drive up here? And I got talking, one of the wardens came by, and I noticed that this guy had some young buck with a monster truck and no brains. He had quite proudly, he had a rope stretched out between two trees, and the warden had already given him about a dozen fines.
Right.
And he had them all clipped up with clothespins.
Right.
Like he was quite proud of that.
Oh, yeah.
And he was rich enough that he didn't care.
Right.
You know? And the warden's nothing but frustrated, but there's nothing more for him to do.
Yeah, yeah.
He gives him a fine, the guy doesn't care.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. He's just going to carry on.
Like somebody like that deserves a good spanking.
Right.
If he's got too much money to not care about fines. But it's you're clearly not a nature lover.
Yeah.
To deface the forest that way.
Right.
So why do you even come here? You know, like
no, it's true. Like, you know, you go out to somewhere like North Ghost or McLean Creek, like where it is kind of a free for all. You do get a lot of the ATVers, the off-roaders. You'll find like, you know, bullet casings, and you'll find garbage, and you'll find like, you know, like it's unfortunate. Like, yeah, people just seem to trash the place, and it's like, well, what are you doing? You know, like you clearly, there's something about this area that's drawing you that is appealing. But the state they're leaving it in is makes it less appealing.
And that was like one example you picked there. I've met skeet shooters, for example,
Right.
that want to get out to the hills to do that, and they lay out a big tarp and do what they do, and at the end of the weekend they roll it up, and there's no casings, there's no
Right.
trace of them being there.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's okay. They made a lot of noise.
Right.
I preferred when I used to camp out in places like you mentioned, the North Coast, that I would put up a proper target, and we'd get out on a hike and come back, and there's a period of time where you're waiting for, you get a fire going and you're waiting for a while to get coals that you're going to cook supper on.
Right.
So I called it the cocktail hour. And we'd put up a proper target and shoot. You get these little 4-inch balloons,
Right.
and we could target practice. You could be a block away, and why would anybody care? We're silent,
Right.
but still shooting something.
Yeah, yeah.
But at sometimes you could barely talk because there were so many guns going off in the background, you know? And some of them clearly not legal. You can tell by.
Right.
I mean, I grew up. I love guns, actually. I'll admit that.
Yeah.
But in the right circumstance, you know, go to a target range or whatever, do things. But when you go out and make that sort of a racket, and you can tell by, when you know guns, you can tell that some of what you're listening to certainly aren't legal weapons
Right.
anymore. There's stuff that sound like bazookas.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's just over the top.
Yeah.
And we don't have enough force. We don't have enough support force, wardens, RCMP, whoever it would be, that can go out and kind of set these guys straight. You know,
Sure.
we need our manpower, right?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of a double, you know, it's like the one side of like kind of threats and enforcement, and then the other side is like, how can you shift the mentality for people to, you know, appreciate, you know, or make them aware of what they're doing, even like West Fraser or the government that's regulating them. It's like, okay, you got this green light to go clear cut all these areas, but don't you realize like what you're doing, like, you know, what that might do to the watershed, what that might do to, you know, the kind of the knock-on effect. It's just so short-sighted in terms of, well, we're going to create, you know, 500 more jobs, and we're going to have some, you know, $1 a tree to sell to China.
Well, I don't even know. Do you know? Did it end up finished in any way with the whole battle that was on about strip mining coal?
Yeah, I believe it was.
South?
Yeah, it was paused, but I think maybe the proposals are back. I don't know. It's hard to keep up with. You know, like it just always
Because it would affect the whole watershed.
Right.
For the ranchers that were downstream, and even some of that, the Elbow River might even go through that land. It would even affect our water supply.
Yeah. So, good organization that's really active here in Alberta is called the Alberta Wilderness Association, and a lot of what they do is try to go through these things through the legal system, and so they've definitely had some successes. But yeah, my father's quite involved with that organization, and it just seems he'll update me occasionally. It just seems just one thing after another, just a constant battle to try and keep some of these things in check, keep some of these spaces, alive and natural.
Yeah, because strip mining coal leaves a very ugly landscape behind.
Yeah.
If you fly over the area around Estevan, where they've been coal mining for years, if they still do, maybe they got it all by now, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's, I forget what the name for it was, but they had this incredibly huge drag line that would go in and take a single bucket, would scrape up enough coal to fill it. Forget regular dump trucks.
Right.
They had these monster dump trucks, like
Yeah.
to drive in there. I faked some sort of. I used to be a member of this, just a club. It was just an amateur club. You could just join for $10, called Associated Photographers International or something like that. So I had shirts, you know,
Right,
I had business cards from Associated Photographers, and the guy would be on the phone at the gate because visitors weren't welcome, and he'd say, "Oh well, I've got a guy here who's doing a story," and they'd let me in.
Right.
But there was an occasion I had to be so careful because my truck fit in the tire tracks
Oh, wow.
of these monster trucks, and they're so big that their sight line, you know, you had to be really careful because they could just crush you.
Yeah.
Their sight line is so long because
Yeah.
these trucks are so big that take the big loads over to that's where they burn the coal to spin turbines to create electricity for your electric cars. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And if you fly over that Estevan area, it may as well be a lunar surface or something. It's just so god-awful ugly,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, it's part of the modern conundrum. I mean, because here in Alberta, like our main source of energy, like turn on the lights, to have your computer, your phone, all that stuff, like it's coal. We're burning coal. And as you pointed out, you know, electric vehicles, all fine and well, but that's a batteries. You know, it's not a power source. You're still relying on the same, you know, power source, not to mention, what's involved in mining all the minerals for the batteries and, you know, solar, great, but it also does come with its problems too.
Yeah.
So.
We shouldn't go there because then we're going to get political, and that's not why we're here.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay. Well, you know, I think we've chatted, you know, enough. We started with the idea of like animal kingdom, learning from it, and then talking about forests and the importance, you know, conservation through engagement, you know, the real treasure, the real value of our natural ecosystems. Talk to me about kind of like the value of having a garden as a herbalist. You know, like that's something that we can control if you are a homeowner, and even if you aren't a homeowner. Like before I owned a house, like for more than a decade, my wife and I, like we would, it was compost and like basically pot gardening, not as in growing cannabis, but
Yeah.
garden pots, and we would just move, you know, we'd move the all the compost, we'd move our, you know, our flower pots, that kind of thing, until we got a home and we were blessed enough to, you know, develop up the yard and the garden, and it seems a real kind of integrated approach, and taking inspiration from you and seeing what you had done with your yard. Talking about kind of like that, the role that plays, the importance. What was that for you as a herbalist, as somebody that was into nature, to, as you had said before, you know, like dig up all the grass and, you know, plant all these species?
Well, and there were people who would be quite astonished because other than the perennials that were like, say, Saskatoons and things that were shrubs, every fall, after I'd harvested anything I wanted to, I buzzed that with a weed eater, leaving about 2 inches of stems to hold a bit of whatever mulch just blew in.
Right.
You know, so some leaves. And by midsummer, or even late spring, the whole yard was 5 feet high again. And gardeners that would see me out, if they caught me out working on the yard, would ask, you know, like, well, how much do you water this? Never.
Zero.
These are Alberta plants. They belong here. And if the weather doesn't suit them, if they're going to freeze to death or not survive a drought, oh well, you know, kind of thing. But that was sort of my feeling about the whole thing, right?
Right.
And what kind of fertilizer do you use? My own compost. Really, that you don't know. You know, I don't buy anything. I don't fertilize it. I don't water it. I mean, maybe if I was putting in some new babies, like transplants or something like that, where you needed to just help them root a little bit for a week or two with some watering.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I didn't water at all. And in the backyard, I had my downspouts from the eaves troughs went into a rain barrel that as soon as it overflowed, it overflowed into some PVC pipe that went to my pond.
Right.
So that I didn't have to water the pond either.
Yeah, cool.
You know, and the backyard was pretty lush between the shade and on our worst heat days. It helped that I had a 2-story house with a 2-story on each side. We were shading each other that way, and that when I when I restored the home, I did the maximum insulation and quality windows and all that sort of thing. But I had kind of learned to, for some years, depending on what dog I had, I didn't even close the deck doors off my kitchen into the backyard.
Right.
And this is just blocks from downtown Calgary, right?
Yeah,
Never mind not locking. I didn't even close the doors.
Right.
Once I didn't have a dog anymore, if I was up early, I would just open the double deck doors to let all that cool morning air in. That's something I like about Calgary, is it can be 30 during the day, but 4 overnight.
Right.
So first thing in the morning, open the doors, let all that cool air in. It kind of chilled the house, and then close them and keep them closed all day.
Right.
There was no opening windows. So if I was out shopping all morning or something and came home, it was midday on a 27-degree day, and you walked in, you'd swear I had air conditioning.
Right.
Because that was just by controlling the doors and windows, right?
Yeah. You can really, control, like by intentionally creating an ecosystem. Yeah, there's all kinds of spin-off benefits.
And there was enough growing there that I could do a herb walk I could do a no-walk herb walk.
Right. Yeah.
In fact, I did that once with the cost of admission included wild plant salad and salmon cooked properly, and as many margaritas as you wanted. And I only did it once because people got into the margaritas so much I don't think they remembered anything, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we had fun.
Yeah.
But so you can make it your own little, and I know I'm not alone in doing that.
Yeah.
There's other people that have, like the Horticultural Society do garden tours.
Right.
Where you go to visit, and I was one of them, let's see what this guy had done with his home. And some of them were just sheer beauty, where mine was more purposeful.
Right.
With the harvest. And
I was chatting with somebody this idea the other day. Maybe we'll get into this question. I've been asked it twice in the last 2 weeks, and I feel like I've kind of failed in my answer, but we'll see what you think as well. So, chatting with my friend Dakota Cohen the other day for a live on his channel, and this idea of because there's a lot of herbalists who just have a regular old lawn, for whatever reason. Sometimes it's kids or sometimes it's a dog. Like there's a practicality there. Mm-hmm. But part of me is just like, wow, like what a missed opportunity, to here's somebody that loves plants, that's out, harvesting or using them. It's just like, why wouldn't you, transform the little bit of tiny land that you have control over and can direct its fate and create something beautiful and more representative of, their connections with the plant world. So here's a question I've been asked twice in the last 2 weeks, and I haven't had the best answer. My second answer was like getting there, but I'm going to put some real thought into it, and really I'll do a separate post on it. But so the question was, if you could choose 5 plants to grow in a garden, what would they be?
I hate questions like that.
Right? Like from a herbalist perspective, I know it's like, gosh, it's too wide open. So the second one I got a little bit better, and I think it's going to be an area that I'll flush it out. We'll have it proper. So I was thinking about like, I would grow something that would be good for like pain and or sleep. So I was like, okay, I'd probably think of like categories of herbs.
Yep,
so
okay.
In that, my first response is like I'd probably grow like poppies, like California poppy or that type of thing.
Valerian's a good perennial.
Yeah, valerian's a good perennial for sure. Mints are really easy, and mint can be beneficial in so many ways. But so I was thinking of like, okay, maybe I'd break it down into categories. Okay, here's like pain, sleep, like digestive herbs, and think of more kind of categories and what are the top 5 that we could cover off as bases. Nettles had come to mind, again, as a perennial. They're just so kind of resilient, and you could have a nice little nettle patch that tend.
For me, fireweed was something that was always at the back of my patch.
Oh, okay.
Because they're perennial, and how good they are in the spring.
Yeah.
And then they get to a point where the leaves get bitter by midsummer, but you can cook them.
Yeah. And then you could also do that like Ivan's chai, where if they're older leaves, you pick them and then roll them, like essentially bruise them, oxidize them, and then they're a nice tea.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so part of that depends. Where a lot of people fail with houseplants is just with light. You can't buy a desert plant and
Right.
put it in the dark.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
need a full sun window, like
Yeah.
I have in my room these days. And I actually killed a few plants because I have too much light in my room.
Right.
So there's plants that are shade plants. They grow in at the lowest levels of the rainforest. We buy a lot of our tropical houseplants that you buy at the store.
Yeah.
So those are for shady. You can have an office with almost no windows.
Right.
For some of our shade lovers.
Yeah.
And if you put them in a window, there was one guy I had to correct because there's some places at the home where it's sort of, you can grow tomatoes and things like that. There's a few areas. But there was one guy with, I'm trying to remember what to call it even, but it wasn't doing well at all because it was getting baked. And he thought it must not be getting enough sun. So he put it in even full sun. And I actually hung a note
Right.
on the plant for whoever owns this.
Yeah.
You got to put it in the shade somewhere.
Right.
If you haven't killed it already. So what have you got for a lot? Mm-hmm. Back to what are you going to grow
Yeah.
in your home garden?
Totally. Think about the light.
You got to work with it that way.
And so another strategy I thought of, right, is like, so one thing you could do is plant what is native, right? Okay, in my yard I'm going to have a pine, I'll have some ursi, and I'll have some wild strawberry, and I'll have some yarrow, and all these types of things. And I think that can be great. Like, let your yard be a representation of kind of the greater ecosystem. Choose those native plants that you would find in the forest. And there's a ton of value to that in terms of, I think you can develop a deeper relationship when you care for it. You find the right spot for it and so on and so forth. And then another approach actually, and I get this from my father, who's actually not really a gardener, so it was more kind of like theoretical thinking for him, is he says, what, I don't want to grow tomatoes and zucchinis because everybody grows those, like in midsummer when I've got if I'm lucky, 4 or 5, tomatoes and a big zucchini, like I'll get those from friends. I'll get them from the grocery store because they're just so absolutely abundant.
Yep.
So one could view that in the same sense of like, well, why would I grow yarrow? I can just go down, to the local forest and go pick it. And my ursi, it's already so abundant. So the other approach could be pick those things that maybe are endangered or aren't abundantly available in the ecosystem. You can choose other species that you plant in your garden, so you've got access to them in relationship, things that are more unique. So just 2 different ways to kind of think about what one might plant in their garden.
Well, and taking it a big step further, where people have bought land
Yeah.
and want to grow something that they can actually profit from.
Right. Yeah.
Before you plant anything, search your market.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Somebody that I had met had bought and planted acres of garlic, which has a market, but they couldn't find it. I don't know, was it garlic? Anyway, they planted something where they had like a whole quarter section of it,
Yeah.
and then they didn't have a market, and they ended up plowing it all under,
Oh no. Yeah.
and to try something else the following year.
Yeah.
So,
But it does bring up an interesting point. Like I like to give the example of Schizandra, right? This is a Chinese herb, kind of popularized through Chinese medicine. Almost all the supply comes from China, which China can have the best, it can have the worst. Like there's a range of quality there. There's all kinds of considerations should someone get, foods and herbs from China, etc. But the absolute best source that I know of and that we purchase from is a man in Massachusetts who a number of decades ago, realized the value of the herb, looked at his own growing zone and goes, you know what, this thing can grow. And he's the go-to guy. Like, a lot of the top, supplement companies, herb companies source from him because it's in the U.S., organically grown, like it's amazing. And, rhodiola, even though it does grow here kind of natively, certain variety of it, the Alberta Rhodiola Growers Association, took that idea and why doesn't Alberta become a hub for rhodiola, ginseng? You have it growing in Ontario, BC, similarly as well. So I always thought that was brilliant. I know people have tried it with gojis. You can find fresh gojis in the grocery store because there's people in California and BC that have now taken it on as a commercial crop. So what is that for somebody that's watching that maybe has land that's thinking about, okay, well I could grow garlic or I could grow potatoes or I could grow these kinds of things. Are there any herbs that astragalus, you name it, whatever it is, that has a real commercial viability because it's unique and maybe the kind of more common source is so much farther away, but if we could have a locally grown version that.
Well, or from a business perspective, people that I know like Dorothy, for example, Yarrow's mother.
Yeah.
When she bought her little, I'm not sure how much land she has there. It's not a huge property, but there was a huge lawn, which for us, that's just a waste of land, right? Mm-hmm. So she took, you have to make the investment because you don't get any payback for a couple of years, but she took most of her lawn and invested in shade cloth to grow golden seal.
Oh, okay.
Right? Yeah. And then you got to start with rootlets, and between the shade cloth and the rootlets, it's a couple of years before you have anything to harvest.
Right.
But then you get paid off big.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's a very valuable herb.
Cool.
So you can go that route. But if you want something that sort of looks nice and whatever, then we're back to some of what you've covered already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And things like yarrow, I mean, you can harvest the whole plant because you can make macerated oils with it. You can dry it for tea, and something that with some of those, there's a lot of herbs, and yarrow's one of them, that like the sticks, the dried stalks used to be when you bought an old leather bound, probably from China, like a copy of the I Ching or whatever, the sticks for casting were yarrow stalks.
Right.
And that got me onto, as a percussionist, for acoustic work.
Oh yeah. Because
I was taking the stalks and putting them together just with rubber bands, and you can get this really nice effect just from tapping them in your hand, or you can get a little swirl sound, and I would make some short ones and some long enough that if you were just doing a little shuffle dancing or whatever, you could bang it off your hip and then your hand, you could actually dance with it. So I made several percussion instruments out of the dead stalks.
Oh, cool.
So 100% of the plant got used.
Neat.
Right?
Yeah. That's a niche product, hey? The percussive instrument for the herbalist. Yeah.
But you could probably sell them if you had a booth, not just for those, but if you had, the sort of booth that I used to have with oils and dried herbs and books and crystals and everything else.
Yeah.
I probably could have sold some of those.
Yeah, cool.
But people have done it. I've had people I met as students that ended up a nice tract of land that the family had all disinterested in to move to the city. And maybe some of it was leased to a neighbor for a while. Like I remember Tony Marshall, for example, it took him a few years to reestablish all of his land as organic.
Right.
Because a lot of it had been leased to a neighbor that was growing canola or whatever and spraying or doing whatever, doing the whole Monsanto thing. So it took him a while to reestablish his land. But having them look at the property and sort of going, okay, because I had said, work with what's there.
Right.
So there's shady areas or whatever, and they kind of decided, okay, well, we can grow this over there, and we can start a you-pick strawberry operation over here.
Right.
And they ended up, within a couple of years, they were generating more revenue than, so many farms were versatile. There was a little bog over there, and there was rocks over there, and different things. And the old rules were turn it into a big flat piece of land that you can grow wheat
Right.
and combine it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where in today's world, you can actually go revisit that land and recreate the swamps for the ducks and the deer, and
Right.
get some shade black over here and rework it. And that's when I see somebody do that and generate better profit than the wheat growing function ever did, I'm just proud for them.
Yeah, totally.
That's the grander scope, as opposed to the mini scopes, which you're certainly doing here.
Yeah.
And virtually everything in your yard is harvestable, I think, no?
Yeah, there's a few that are like either I don't know or it's just more kind of ornamental. Yeah, but we have definitely really emphasized, there's some sort of harvestable use of it.
For years, I would say, if you're going to grow in my yard, you have to be edible or medicinal or both or really good looking. And even a lot of the beautiful things like begonias, it's happened several times when I'm buying my begonias in the spring and in line at one of the garden centers, and say, oh, aren't those beautiful? I said, well, no, I actually buy them for salads.
Right.
And somebody behind me said, you can eat those? And I said, well, yeah, try one. And I end up with about 6 women that are all getting involved in this conversation. You can eat begonias? Who knew?
Right.
So a lot of people don't even realize it. And, midsummer, when you have things like lemon thyme, chocolate mint, begonias, lilies are all edible.
Yeah.
Other than in the wild, we have death camas, which is in the lily family. But anything you'd recognize as a lily. I've even met, all the violets. And if you have a shady area, like beside your house, between 2 homes, introduce a few plants, and the Western Canada violet will just take over a shade space like that.
Yeah.
And man, they're tasty.
Yeah.
And you can use them in stir fries and just about everything, right? So there's so many things that you can introduce that are, like you said, it's not that I'm, what's the word for cheap? Frugal. It's not that I'm frugal, but I still like free.
Right.
So if there's something I can go that's abundant in the woods and bring a few plants back and they take over a section, and by golly, eventually for people that are doing what we've done, start giving away things like that to help other people start. And I always just say, okay, bring dirt so that you can replace your divots, as a golfer would say. And I can give you a whole bunch of stuff, like take a shovel full of the Western Canada violets, for example, and that sort of thing, and give away stuff, and knowing it's just going to grow back in.
Yeah.
I had read somewhere about if you're going to have a strawberry plot, the best way to get more berries is whether you just do it visually or actually lay strings out the first time or whatever. New plants grow more fruit.
Okay.
So the idea is, if you have a big space that's going to be your strawberry patch, you completely just grind into the ground with your rototiller, 2 widths or whatever, so say 4 feet. You just grind it all into the soil, and then leave 4 feet of the existing plants, and just do this striped thing.
Oh, okay.
The ones that you've left behind will send runners into the mulched part.
Right.
And the youngest, the new plants, are going to provide more berries.
Right.
So ultimately, within 2 years, you get more fruit off the same patch of
Right.
land. There's just all these little tricks,
Yeah.
that people learn.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's manageable. You can make it pretty. You can do it without chemicals.
Without excessive water, with all these restrictions that are certainly on early this year, and I think that's going to be kind of a new thing, which I think is positive, just to kind of get people to rethink, their landscapes. We don't need beautiful green grass lawns, on every house. That requires so much input, not only from water, but then the maintenance, the mowing, and the what's required to power those mowers and so on.
There was an article I read, I think it was in the Calgary Herald, but it was discussing a drought in Vancouver with people's, they had it down where it was like, they did it with sides of the street. So on the calendar,
Right.
The north side gets to water and then the south side gets to water.
Yeah.
But you'd have this one incredibly green yard on the wrong side of the street.
Right.
And this guy is out there at 4 a.m. in his boxers shorts watering his lawn.
Covert. Yeah.
And so the word was invented, he's just a grass hole.
Oh, hilarious.
And I laughed about that for a week.
Yeah. For sure.
Grass hole.
Don't be a grass hole.
But yeah.
Cool. All right, well, that's good. I'm glad we ended up kind of more on a positive note. I always get a little bit, I don't know what the right word is, when I talk about, kind of some of the environmental issues we're facing and clear cutting and, but that is something that we can do. We can take action and have a real positive influence on our yards, our gardens. Anything to finish up before we close? I know these mics we're getting, there's one of them that's just about to die. I think it's yours, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye-bye, Mike. Bye-bye, Mike.
Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this. And we'll see you again for another episode soon. Bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to give us a like, share this with someone you know who would benefit, and subscribe so you're up to date with all the new episodes coming out. You can shop online at lightcellar.ca, as well as visit us in the heart of Bowness in Calgary, Alberta.